Welcome to our Facebook Live event here with Impact Ministries. We're so glad that you chose to join us this morning. And we want to encourage you while you're on Facebook to go ahead and like us and let us know what you think. There's a place down there you can even ask some questions as we're kind of dialoguing and walking through all of this. And my name is Glenn Underhill, and I am the executive pastor at Crossroads Church. And this is Ken Adams, our lead pastor and resident disciple maker. And man, we just love talking about disciple making.
We do, man. It's one of our favorite things to do.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
It's awesome.
And I know we've been talking a lot over the last several months, this whole idea of becoming a disciple making church, creating a culture of disciple making.
Yeah.
And we've been looking at several things that I know that have been really important here at Crossroads as we've been on this journey. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the whole idea of creating the right target. Know what your target is. We talked about our strategy, and that the strategy ought to model Jesus' strategy of making disciples. But then we turned our attention to this whole idea of environment. Mm-hmm. So once you have your target in mind, once you then have your strategy lined up, then this idea of moving to environments. Yep. And we looked at 4 of them. Right. And you want to talk about the first 3 just real quick? I know that because just as a recap on it.
Yeah, that's good. And so I like the way you set that up, because here's the thing. Disciple making churches don't just happen, right? So we know that because there's a lot of churches, a lot more churches that are not making disciples, unbelievable, than are. And so my favorite thing to say is I heard years ago that Jesus started the church the way he wanted it. Now he wants it the way he started it. So he wants the church to be a disciple-making church. And so that means that we do have to have a clearly defined target. We have to have a strategy, but then we've got to create environments. And those environments are really small group environments. Mm-hmm. We do have large group environments and ministry environments, but the basic structure for disciple making, if we go back to Jesus' model, was small group, because that's what Jesus did. So Jesus changed the lives of a handful of individuals. They were untrained. They were common men, uneducated. And Jesus led them in such a way. This is incredible. Jesus led those guys in such a way that over a period of years, they literally were equipped to change the world. And they did.
They did change the world.
So here's what they did. Jesus gave them content, which meant he gave them information that they needed. Jesus gave them some contact. Man, he just did life with them. Right. And he gave them context, which was, we'll talk about in a minute. Right. Then he gave them correction. Yeah. So we're talking in this little Facebook Live time, really talking about context and what context means and how that worked.
Yeah. And it's really important, because to not have this piece would be to miss a huge portion of what Jesus was doing in the life of his small group.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say, in all of the disciple making and discipleship that I see today, I think context is the biggest missing piece, and maybe is one of the most important parts of the disciple making process.
Yeah. Well, I think it might be good for us to kind of flesh out what's the goal when we think about a goal for this context. What really is the goal behind it? What are we trying to emphasize, to push through when we talk about this?
So really the goal of context is ministry training. So it's not just the accumulation of more information, it's the application of information.
Yeah. And that's key.
It's huge, man. And so if all we do is sit in a circle and do study together and all, that's great. We want that. But sooner or later we want to practice that. We want some hands-on implementation and application of what we've been learning. So let me give you a verse, man. This is a great verse. Comes out of Mark chapter 2. Now, I'm just giving you one verse of several that demonstrate the idea of context. So this is in Mark chapter 2. Jesus is at Matthew's house. Levi, he's called in Mark, same guy. In verse 15 it says, "And as he reclined at the table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him." So the phrase in there that is huge is and his disciples. So Jesus was on a fishing trip.
Right. Right.
He was in a house of a tax collector where they had invited other quote sinners and tax collectors, and Jesus is there, but he is not by himself.
Right.
Jesus has his disciples with him.
Right.
Therefore, ministry training happens with context.
Yeah, and I totally agree, because I think this is such a missing element, and we focus so much on content a lot of times, and we forget that this context, putting it into application, the hands-on, is absolutely vital for application to really, for truth to move from my head to my heart to my hands.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I know one of the things you emphasize over and over and over about this whole thing. You've got a statement that you say a lot around here, and we hear it all the time. So why don't you kind of throw that out to us?
So really, context is the laboratory, and it's not the lecture hall. When I was in school back years ago, I was taking a class in anatomy and physiology, and so I think like 4 days of the week, I would go sit in an hour lecture, and so I'd get taught all these lessons about muscles and ligaments and tendons and where they connect and all this kind of stuff, and then 2 days out of the week, I would go to a 2-hour lab, and so I would talk about them in the lecture, but then we would dissect something, or we would look at something. We would be hands-on. And so, man, I think context is where Jesus is teaching them the importance of fishing, and then he takes them fishing. Jesus takes them, he talks about prayer, but then he takes them out to pray with him. And so we need more of that. We need more of that. I'm telling you right now, Glenn, that if there was one thing that could happen in disciple making across the board, more that would have a greater impact than anything, it would be that we get better. We got to get a lot better at implementing context. We've got to see disciple making as ministry training. It's not just accumulating more information, but it's actually applying it out into the ministry field, if you will.
Real life. Actually, doing it out in real life.
Get it out of the lecture hall, get it into the laboratory.
So, man, I get that, and we talk a lot about, hey, we want this thing to become life-giving, and but we also talk about not only this whole idea of moving from a lecture hall to a laboratory, but also we have some stages, several stages that we emphasize a lot in this context piece.
Right. Yeah. So this is commonly used. You hear this in a lot of different contexts. You hear this in leadership development. You hear this in ministry. But honestly, I think the very best place for these stages to be demonstrated or articulated is really in what Jesus did with his disciples. So when you look at these stages, the very first stage, and Jesus was a master at all 5 of these, right? Mm-hmm. But the very first stage in giving somebody context is the stage where you say, I do it, you watch what I do, and then let's talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so, clearly in this passage that we just read, they were with Jesus, watching him interact with lost people. Right. And so the very first stage is really simple. You just hang out with me and watch what I do, but then let's talk about it. Let's make it intentional. So then the second stage is that I will do the ministry. You help me, and then we talk about it. So you're getting a little bit more involved in the process. Right. So then the third step or the third stage is you do it, I'll help you do it, and then we'll talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so again, it's all progressive. We're all taking it one more step. Right. So it would be maybe if we were talking about leading a group. So at this stage, I would ask somebody in my group, hey, you lead a lesson this time, and then I'll be there and I'll help you so you won't be on your own and you won't get hung up on something. Right. And then afterwards, we'll talk about how it went. Right. And so I actually am doing this right now with a group of guys in a small group on Thursday mornings. Yeah. And so then the next step is that you do it, and I'm just going to watch and
Right.
kind of observe how it goes, and then we'll talk about it. And then the last step is you do it, somebody else watches, and then we talk about it. And that's where you're repeating the process all over again. So, you can apply that 5 stages to really just about any aspect of disciple making.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I see that really lived out in Jesus' life.
absolutely.
In the end of Matthew chapter 9, where he says, hey, you guys got to be praying for the Lord of the harvest to send out workers.
Yeah, that's it.
And then immediately, what does he do? He sends the 12 out because they've been watching and then been helping, and then he watched them do it, and then and then they watch and do, and then he sends them out. And then in the next chapter, in chapter 10, they went out and got a few more, and it went to 72, and he launched them out again. And
that's exactly right.
You see that happen over and over and over, the context of that.
Yeah, and even in that, Jesus brings them back in, and he debriefs with them.
Yeah.
And so they talk about it.
Right.
So Jesus mastered all of these stages, man. And the thing is that we need to, there's 2 examples of that. They can either be planned experiences, or they can be unplanned.
Right.
And so a little bit of the difference there is just when you have a planned experience, like let's say I have a group of guys and we do a servant project together. Mm-hmm. So again, that's not just sitting in a group talking about evangelism, that's doing evangelism. Mm-hmm. So we might go do a water bottle giveaway at a ball field where there's people that are hot, and we show up with a cooler full of waters, or soft drinks or whatever. And so we go out, we do something together. Then the next time, I might ask one of them to lead, and then we talk about how it went and that kind of thing. They're getting experience. Another example would be just doing a prayer walk together. And so you could just go out together and pray together. You can even study the Bible together. You could teach somebody in your group how to do a more in-depth study of the Bible. Because when you go to the group, all you're talking about is what you've learned from it. You're not really showing them how you do it. So a hospital visit would be an example. If you knew somebody was in the hospital, or if we were going to have lunch together with somebody who was far from God. I did this not too long ago with a guy in our church that had a friend, a neighbor actually, who's far from God. We both knew him, but he set up a lunch, and we went together. We had a great conversation with this guy about what does it mean to really be a Christian, because he's not.
Right.
And so we had a great conversation. So you have these planned experiences, but then you also have things that are unplanned.
Right.
And so unplanned would be things that just kind of happen spontaneously. Maybe doing an act of kindness for somebody, or maybe somebody has a crisis, or maybe there's a crisis in a community. And so you just respond. But the key in both of these is that you don't respond by yourself.
Right.
Is that you take the person that you're discipling with you and get them involved in the ministry experience. Right. That's where you do training for ministry.
And that's just super, super powerful stuff, because it's just absolutely imperative.
It is.
I think that the church, unfortunately, and I think you could probably, and I'm talking the larger church here, we've been really good at telling people what they need to do, but we've really failed in this whole idea of really showing them how to do it and then releasing them. I mean, we can tell, but you got to show by the hands-on, unplanned, or predetermined times, and then release them to do it. So it's super, super important.
Yeah, let me give you one last example, because this is an easy, great example. My wife was in a discipleship relationship with a girl one time, and they took a meal to a friend of hers house whose husband had cancer. And they ended up having a conversation with this guy about his eternity. And so because they took the discipleship outside the group, they did something together, they got an opportunity to experience something. I guarantee you, this girl that my wife was discipling, I promise you, she learned something about sharing her faith in that living room with this guy. Absolutely. That she would never learn in a book.
Yep.
She would never get that in a book. we got to do more of this, brother.
Right.
We got to.
Well, and it comes back. It makes it really about a lifestyle, and it puts it into real terms, into the reality of life.
So let me say this, man.
Yeah.
So anybody that's listening to this Facebook Live, the takeaway here is go do something in ministry this week, but take somebody you're discipling with you. Yeah. Don't do it by yourself. That is the takeaway. Take somebody with you, give them hands-on ministry training. Get them out there. Get them in the laboratory.
Well, we want to say thanks for hanging out with us for a few minutes, and man, we could talk about this kind of stuff all day long.
We could go, baby. We could go.
And so I know we're going to be having another Facebook Live event next month, and so we want to encourage you, if you have questions or you want a dialogue or you want to take a little bit deeper dive in this, we encourage you to go online. You can download a free copy of this booklet that we have called Discover Disciple Making. It's totally free of charge, and we would encourage you to take a look at that and then contact us or follow us on social media and just let us know what can we do to help you in this whole idea of creating and igniting a culture of disciple making in your church.
Yeah, so I want just to add to that, you can go to impactdiscipleship.com and find out a lot more about what's going on with Impact. Read our blog, check out our podcast and all that. But one of the things that we'd really like to do is we'd love to come kind of help a church get started and actually launch a disciple-making movement in their church. And so if we can help serve you in any way, just let us know that. We'd be more than happy to connect with you. And our whole purpose is to help non-disciple making churches become disciple making churches. So anything we can do to help, let us know. We're here to serve.
Yeah, great. Well, again, thanks for hanging out with us for a little bit. Again, like us on your Facebook page, and again, we enjoyed having you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Sounds good.